Alright guys, so a little bit of a different video for tonight. This is going to be a voiceover video, so I basically painted that, and then after that I sat in front of the video watching it, and I was explaining what I'm doing and basically how I felt while I was painting this thing. This is the very first bust that I'm painting in my life, so it's quite an experience for me. Now right before the video, I will show on screen two different pictures. So the first one is a picture of the finished bust from the front. Sorry, the second one is going to be the finished bust from the front, and the first one is going to be a picture that I took from the model right before painting it, but with a hard light pointing on it. So that picture was a picture that I used as a guiding, as a model basically, for where to put my light, my highlights, and my shadows on that specific models. So later down the road, I'm going to do a bit of a video about lighting for model painting, where I'm going to take a similar bust and I'm going to actually do a whole bunch of pictures with various way of lighting the models and explaining how light works from a photographic standpoint, so that you can then apply that knowledge to miniature painting. Now, for now, let's have a look at that very first bust that I painted, and I hope you enjoy this video. Alright, so basically the bust has been primed black, and we're going to work on skin tone with mahogany and tan flesh mainly. Now, the video has been sped up because otherwise it would be an over 2 hour long video, and also this is a voiceover because I wanted to paint this thing without having to think too much about explaining. So what I'll be doing is that I'll simply be explaining with voiceover the various steps that I took while I was painting this. So basically I'm watching the video and I'm talking over the video. So I started with a large brush, so this is number 3 monument, and I realized that in some instance I am outside of the video frame. So that is going to look a little bit like a paint by the number miniature. So I started by doing mahogany mix with the flesh tone. There's basically about 50-50 mahogany and flesh tone there, and what I'm painting initially is all the shadows on the bust. Now, part of it is going to be out of the frame like this. I'm sorry for that, but it keeps going back in the frame, so hopefully you guys can forgive me for this one. So what I'm doing right now is just positioning all the shadows. Now in a future video, I'm going to do basically a guide as to how do you choose where to put your shadows. And this is going to come probably not next week, because this one is going to be slightly longer to do, but sometimes in the next months, that's for sure. Now, of interest, until I did the eyes and the eyelid, I actually used Monument Igniter number 3 for the full paint process of that guy. Now, the full paint process that I'm showing there took about 2 hours, so it's fairly quick. And note that this is a sketch, so this is the first ever bust that I have painted. I have not looked up bust painting techniques, so this is me winging it essentially. I'm going however I feel like this is a good way of going, and I'm learning in the process. Now note that this is a fairly large surface when compared to a 28 millimeter, millimeter model, so the paint reacts differently on that, because you're basically stretching the paint as much as you can, right? So applying the paint on such a large scale is basically different. So on the full surface of the shadowed area, what I did is that I applied 2 coats of a mahogany and the flesh tone that I was using, which is tan flesh from Pro Acrylic. So this is the second coat. I actually had to remix a little bit of that mixture. I know that this one is slightly darker, so there's a little bit more mahogany in this specific coat of paint. So obviously, since this is a shadow, the light will be coming from the top left of the face. As I said in the beginning, this is an attempt at doing a Rembrandt portrait. So Rembrandt basically is a painter that painted an auto-portrait of himself with a very specific lighting, and that lighting became extremely popular in photography. So when you're moving up in scale like that, it becomes very interesting to do lighting effect on your model, because there's so many details that you can actually look at painting the model the exact same way that you would take a picture with a camera. So in the coming months, as I said earlier, I will be doing a lighting guide for miniature, where I'm literally going to take a bust or larger miniature, and we're going to look at how light fall on a given model. Alright, so now we're going for a lighter tone of skin. I'm going to do basically a similar process of what I just did there. So this is a middle tone, so not the lightest tone, but middle tone. This is still a little bit of tan flesh mixed with mahogany, however a lot less mahogany in there at the moment. But it's the exact same process, and you're going to see there's going to be a stage in the painting of that mini where it looks absolutely ridiculous because of the way I'm applying paint. It at some point it very much looks like this thing is just a paint by the number. But anyway, you can laugh at me at that moment, but when you see the final result, I hope that you're not going to find this too horrible. So very much the areas where I'm selecting paint right now, what I did is at the very beginning of the paint process, before I actually touched the model with any paint, I took a very strong light and I positioned the light with regard to a bare model exactly how I wanted to paint the light. And I'm going to have like right now I'm just looking at the videos, but when I'm doing the final edit of the video, I'm going to put the picture of the model with the light on it side by side with the final model so that you can compare them. So I'm not blindly putting my paint here. What I'm looking at is, while I'm painting, I have right beside me, I have a picture of the model that is gray, but with a strong light lighting the model so that I can see all the shadows on the model. So I'm not painting blindly. I'm actually following a picture of that exact same model that I took right before starting the paint job. So this is basically very much helpful because if you've never painted a bust like myself in this video, honestly, I would have felt completely lost. Like, if I had not have any photography background, which I have, I honestly would not have known where to start, because that large scale basically comes with so much more detail than a small head that you need models. Like this is like someone painting a fine art portrait. They need a model, and they're following models basically, right? So this is kind of similar to that. So once again, I am sorry that a lot of this is misframed. I had changed my camera setup, but good thing is in between paintbrush stroke, you can see where this is going. I had changed my setting for the camera and I forgot to bring it back. I'm still doing that video because I think it's very interesting. And like, this is the first time I'm painting a bust. It's also the very first time that I'm painting something that is larger scale than 28 or 32 mil. So that here is me basically documenting my very first bust. And over the coming months, I'm going to paint the exact same bust a couple of times, probably with different lighting, but I'm going to paint the exact same bust a couple of times so that I can assess my own progress. So basically, I'm going to practice painting by painting that bust. The reason why I chose that specific one is because it's simple. There's no hair, there's no clothing, there's no nothing. The guy is extremely simple. It's just a human shape, but then there's a lot of expression on the model, and it is a very cheap bust. If you compare price-wise, so this is a Banshee art shop bust. So this was sculpted by Banshee himself, and the price of acquiring this specific bust is very low compared to the price of acquiring most similar quality bust. So that one is going to be the bust I'm going to be using to benchmark myself. As you can see, the color transition are not blended at all. It's all very sharp. There's no smoothness at all there. I have to admit that prior to painting this, I've actually read Banshee's book, and Banshee is basically an excellent painter who started a movement in miniature painting that's called fuck smoothness. And basically what Banshee says is he's looking at fine arts, and he is doing a bit of a critique as to how we are going in miniature painting about our relationship with smoothness. So if you're looking at classical painters, you rarely see very smooth blends, and basically it's not a thing. Like, you see blends, but those blends are not that smooth at all. And as a matter of fact, if you're looking at the stuff that's around you, around the world, when there's lighting involved and all that stuff, it is fairly infrequent that you see an actual super smooth blend in nature. In nature, most of the stuff that you're going to see are a mashup of color, and the blends are not that smooth at all. So have a look at his book if you're interested in looking at various. It's not, this book is not a paint classes. It is very much more a book that will get you thinking about your painting and will probably have you explore new ways of going about painting. That is the book that got me interested in painting larger scale, and also one of the books that got me very much into looking at lighting for miniature painting. And the interesting thing is, I used to do a lot of photography, and I never realized that my photography knowledge could be applied in miniature painting. And honestly, that's how Typhus turned the way he actually turned, and that's also how this miniature has been driven. So I'm starting to kind of look past the actual painting technique in favor of more image building techniques, because I'm starting to look at this in a way that even if the miniature painting techniques is not necessarily super strong, if your colors and if your lighting of what you're painting is very interesting and is very strong, then the end result is going to be that you're going to have a very interesting miniature in the end, and that makes things very interesting. So now I've switched to the lighter tone, and keep one thing in mind. When I'm painting like that on camera, I tend to overexpose my subjects so that all the small details in the blacks can be seen. So the color that I'm putting on right now, while it appears like it is white on the camera at the moment, or close to white, if you're looking very carefully, it actually is not white. It's just that this area is overexposed because of the camera. And as it dries, it also becomes more muted. And yeah, okay, so right now what I did is I lowered the camera exposure because I was noticing that the skin tone was coming out as white, and this is the pure skin tone. So this is tan flesh, as is no mahogany in it. This is just tan flesh. And this is going on what is at that moment the lighter part of the skin tone. Now, one important thing I do need to say is I actually enjoyed painting this thing quite a lot. It was different from painting miniatures. It took me, now this video is sped up, so this video is going to be like about an hour 15. But the actual painting process took about 2 hours and 15 minutes. But that's from beginning to end. And this is a fairly big mini. Obviously, I did not care too much about the blendings, but in the end it still resulted in something that I think is interesting. But anyway, you'll see and you'll be my judge. This is my first bust, and as I said before, this is going to be my benchmark for future improvement. And I'm still with that number 3 brush. I haven't changed to a smaller brush. I'm not looking for fine details at all. I'm doing rough work, and the whole bust, or very close to the whole bust, was painted with that big giant number 3 brush. Now, this side of the face is the side that is directly exposed to light. This is why it is so much brighter, and you can start seeing the feeling of the paint by the number thing. And arguably, at the moment, the miniature looks pretty ridiculous. But you're going to see I'm not leaving this like that. I'm going to push this quite a bit. Alright, so the full model is now covered with that lighter flesh tone. And I'm going for a second coat, because obviously, even though I'm going to stay rough, I do want to have a uniform coverage, right? Otherwise it would be super ugly. Now, have a look at how careful I am with the brush stroke on that second coat. Like, I'm going for clean and smooth coverage here. I'm not just putting paint however, I am going for clean coverage. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is if you do decide to go and paint larger scale, like obviously a bust like this is much larger than the typical miniature that I'm used to paint. it is very much not the same thing. Painting large scale is actually very hard with regard to color controlling and lighting, because it is larger, the eye will not feel as much of the void than with smaller scale minis. So you will have to work your colors a lot more. Like a face like this, because it's bigger, you expect something to look slightly, not to look realistic, but slightly more human than what you would expect on a 28mm miniature. So I've been tempted multiple times in the past to say that larger scale painting seemed easier because the details were very present, and basically you don't have to work as much with very small detail brush. But as it turns out, if you have good brush control for small details, it turns out that larger scale, because of the work that is required in color control, in control of the blending, and basically thinking into how you're painting the model, large scale, as it turns out, is actually really, really hard. Anyway, I had plenty of challenge painting that thing, and there's not a single moment that I painted that thing that I didn't have to think into what it was that I was about to do. Like every single time that you're seeing me stop and look at the model, and thank God I had to do that, because obviously the camera work on this one is not exactly good, but every single time you're seeing me stop and look at the model for a moment, remember that this is a sped up video, so every time I'm stopping to look at the model, this is me looking at, like, okay, what is the next brush stroke that I need to be giving, and what's my next step, because this is the first time I'm painting a boss. Every brush stroke that I'm doing is a brush stroke that I've never done before, and is something that is entirely new to me, and I need to learn as I go. So I need to think while I'm painting a lot more than if this was a normal mini. That one was actually a real challenge for me, but I had so much fun painting this thing. You guys are going to see a lot more of larger scale miniature on Patreon. Probably not on Twitch, because I mean, life being life, what tends to bring people to Twitch is Warhammer 40k miniature and stuff like that. But for Patreon, since I'm trying to take an angle on Patreon where we're pushing a little bit more and looking into more advanced concept and basically explaining more advanced concept on Patreon, I think it is appropriate that I start looking into larger scale like this. So another coat. This is much lighter, and the under color was black. So maybe it would have been a good thing for me to base the whole mini at the beginning with my darker color, but I didn't. So this is why right now I'm stuck doing such strong color progression right on black. Lesson learned. Now you will notice that I haven't painted the lips. So the lips were an issue when I started painting this thing, because I was a little bit lost into how I was going to paint them, because lips are actually not skin tone. They're also not red, neither are they fully pink. So I almost finished the model with the lips. We're going to see that later in the video. But there was a lot of thinking all the way while I'm painting this model at this point in time. The whole time I'm actually thinking to, okay, what am I going to do with these lips? Because right now it looks like just like a dead, like it looks like a dead body basically. The lips are super black and it's like, ooh, like obviously this cannot stay black, but how am I supposed to paint these lips? Because had I painted these lips pink, the model would have looked like horrible, because lips are not actually pink. Lips are blue, pinkish, but sometimes they're purple. There's basically, it depends what age someone is, and nobody has the same lips. So all the way while I'm painting this, what goes in my head is I am in trouble with these lips. I have no idea how to paint them, and I'm dreading the moment where I'm actually going to be painting the lips. Like painting the back of the ears, like this is something we never have to do in miniature painting because they barely have ears, right? Very often the back of the head is also not exposed. Like, how am I supposed to paint the back of the head? Because in most miniature that we paint in Warhammer 40k at least, the back of the head is not exposed because it is in a hoodie, it is in an armor. It's most of the time the top of the head is visible, but the back of the head, when you're painting a bald character, the back of the head is rarely exposed or seen. So now I'm adjusting that highlight there because I was finding that the way the light fell on this was not exactly natural and I didn't like it, so I adjusted that. And from now on, we have a model that looks like a model that is painted by the number. I'm going to do a couple of adjustments, but in a second, yeah, right there. If you look at that, this is a paint by the number model. There's going to be a couple of adjustments, but at some point I'm going to do a tour of the model and you're going to see the whole thing. Now, what I'm doing now is that I'm going back to the middle tone color and I'm positioning additional shadows that I find at that moment in time that the model needs. Or I'm, like in this case, I'm erasing a highlight that is just way too strong on the model. But from there on, in painting that model, everything that I'm doing is that I'm playing around the model with either brighter color than what the model has on it, so brighter than tan flesh, or darker color, so darker than the mix of mahogany and tan flesh that I had done in the beginning. And I'm playing around the model like this, and I'm mixing pretty much all of these colors as I go, and doing some blends, even though the blends that I had done there are not smooth, but they don't aim at being smooth. Now, moments ago, about a minute and a half ago, as you saw, I put a shadow right below the lips. If you look at portraiture, you're going to see that most of the time under the bottom lips, humans have shadow casted there by their own lips. So this is what I've done there. So basically, if you're looking at everything that I've been saying since the beginning of this video, and the lighting and all of that stuff, if you're into painting busts or like extreme details with regard to lighting, you could very well be just looking at photography books and just look at the pictures. Look how the color works on the face of the people, how light falls, and all of these stuff. And basically by looking at photography, you're going to learn more about how to position light on a model. Okay, so this is a color that is in between my current brighter tone and my mid tone, and I'm just going and I'm lining around the region where I have a limit in between that mid tone and my skin. I'm going to do this a couple of times, and I'm doing this, as I said, from there on until the end of the video. Everything that I'm doing is I'm playing with that stuff, and often, like in the current case, the paint is really thin. Like as the paint dries, you can see that it becomes pretty much transparent. But I'm not. This is not like when I'm painting a small model on the stream. I'm not going like super slow and taking care that the paint dries. Yes, I'm not going to paint over something that is not dry. The model is large enough that I can move around, but what I'm trying to say is there's no active attempt at making this thing as smooth as possible. I'm very much just slabbing paint on the thing. What I'm thinking in there is way more about lighting than about paint techniques itself. That's another thing we're not used to do, like the under part of the nose, the nostrils. When you're painting 28 mils, you basically don't have nostrils, right? So it's another thing that you don't necessarily have to think of. So I'm completing the frontier basically between the mid-tone and the brightest tone. And as you can see, it actually is already starting to look a lot less like a paint by the number model. Obviously the highlights and the transition and everything is still very sharp, but there's no attempt at making this ultra smooth. It is going to get smoother than this just by nature of applying more color of varied tone, but I'm not working each and every single one of these transitions so much. And when I do, I'm doing using lines instead of multiple layers of glazings. A little bit like comic book style, basically. Okay, so now I'm going for the lips. So I did a mix of the skin tone with the purple, but then I also mixed it with some of that mahogany. The upper lips has to stay a lot more darker because it's not so much exposed to light as it is pointing down and the light source is up. The bottom lips has to be a lot more brighter than the upper lips. And this is what I'm basically currently mixing the colors on the palette. And if I'm not mistaken, this is like one of the spots that I used a smaller brush. Yeah. So in my case, I did purple. Again, I am sorry for being off camera, but at least you're seeing the thing as it goes. So the bottom lips is a lot brighter. And now, lips, the thing that goes with lips is that they're not evenly colored. There's all kinds of cracks in your lips when you're looking at them from a bit of a pessimist eyes. Like, lips are not perfect. Nobody has perfect lips. And I'm going to pretty soon be doing a mixture of lighter skin tone with that purple color, and I'm going to draw a whole bunch of lines on the bottom lips of that character. And this, as you're going to see, yeah, I'm basically adding ivory in that mix, and this brings a lot of definition to that bottom lips, and it changed the whole thing. It makes it looks a lot more like an actual bottom lip. Now this is sadly off camera. I've actually started putting some highlights on the face. This is ivory mixed in with some skin tone. So right now, if you look at the chest, there's some area of the chest that are a lot brighter. Same thing on the neck. I'm working my way up towards the top of the head right now, like the cheeks. The nose is definitely going to be one of the area. The chin is also one of these. Right now the nose and the cheeks have received a lot of work, and we're going to build like that. So I thought that that was the place where I had done the highlights on the lips, but I guess this is just going to be for a little bit later. And as you can see, I'm moving rather fast. Like, yeah, the video is indeed sped up, but I'm still moving pretty fast with the brush there. I'm not waiting too much. I'm not being overly careful with the brush. And these highlights are actually starting to bring a lot of life and the meaning. Now, one of the things that I need to be on the lookout next time I'm painting meaning like that is that my skin is a little bit too pale in there. I should have put a little bit more red tones in the skin, but whatever. I mean, live and learn. That's what they say, right? Again, every time you're seeing me like not putting paint on the mini, just look at the mini like that on the camera. When I was painting, that's not that I'm actually showing you the miniature. That is because I don't know what I'm doing. I am taking a pause, I'm looking at the model, and I am thinking into, okay, what is my next move here? Where do I put the next brushstroke? Now, I do have to admit, when I was painting this model, at that point in the paint process, I was a little bit at lost. I was not sure how to manage the shadow areas and how to blend these in so that they look at least a little bit more natural. And at that point, I have my wet palette beside me, and I'm mixing colors like crazy. Obviously, it's not a whole bunch of different colors, but I'm playing around with my skin tone, my mahogany, my ivory. I'm just mixing all of these a little bit frantically. I'm just going for what I think and what I'm feeling like as I'm looking at the miniature basically get built in front of me. So I decided to go work the shadows more. I want deeper shadows on the side of the face that is not exposed to light. So that's why I added some black to my palette. Now that side of the face should be almost fully in the dark because there's no light that goes there. So I'm currently placing the darkest shadows on the right side of the face. Now these will look very, very harsh, but when you're looking at the bust right from the front, it's going to make a lot of sense. Now, on a Rembrandt portrait, there's always a shadow casted by the nose towards the darkest side. This is one of the things I'm preparing right now. My shadow that I did ended up being slightly too short with regard to an actual real portrait, but it is still there, and in the end it still looks somewhat decent. Now, there was very much not a lot of focus put towards the back of the head. It is essentially in the dark, so there shouldn't be much detail visible. I still did some darker color there, but I've kept it pretty rough. Smoothing out some of the various blends there, or the lack of blends, because there are transitions. Positioning some more highlights on the top of the skull, and that very much is the beginning of the end of the model. I'm currently placing the brightest highlights that are on that model, and after that I'm going to start doing some very little lines across the various color zone to try to blend the sharper transition a little bit. You're going to see that in just a couple of moments there. So most of it currently is happening slightly off cam, but when I'm showing the model on cam, if you're careful, you're going to see there's a whole bunch of lines that are appearing. So what I'm doing is across the very arch transition, I'm coming in with my brush and I'm doing very short, very sharp lines with kind of mid-tone colors in between each transition, and that is helping a lot with smoothing out the blends without having to work the full, like, get the thing super smooth workup. So it's not as smooth as it would be, but then it also only takes a couple of seconds to do instead of hours. So in a couple of minutes, you will see me start looking at painting the eyes. So if you've painted eyes on 28 mils minis before, you probably had that basically fright of painting eyes because they're so small, right? And you're probably telling yourself, oh well, on a larger scale, it's going to be easier because the eyes are bigger. Now it turns out that larger scale also means more detail. So as a painter, you will have to do more details in these eyes. And the funny thing is, bigger does not mean easier in this case, because you probably, if you painted eyes on smaller minis, you probably at some point painted a set of eye that like both eyes were not looking at the same place, and that's a problem. Now let me tell you one thing: when you're painting on a larger scale and you have larger eyes, well, as it turns out, there's just even more chances of you doing eyes that are cross-eyed or not don't have any coordination between them, right? So in a couple of minutes, when I'm going to do the eyes, as I promised when I started this Patreon that you're going to see me fail as well as succeed, you're about to see me fail royally on the right eye of that miniature. So the left eye, I'm rather happy with the job that I did, but the left eye, you are in for a laugh. If you've watched that video for that long, you're about to see one of my epic fails, and it's actually even so much epic that it cannot be fixed, because the right eye is bad and is building some texture. So yeah, that one I'm going to put in my epic fails, and I will not resent any of you if you're laughing about me for screwing up that eye that bad. But for now, we're still doing our small lines for the blends. Now the good thing is you're actually seeing the process right now, which was mostly off cam before. So those small lines, as you can see, are helping hide the very hard transition. The transition is still pretty hard, but it hides it. So that's what I did across the full face of the model for the very, very sharper transitions. I'm putting that dreaded white on the eyes, and epic fail incoming. Now this is not white, it's actually ivory. Painting pure white is never a super good idea for something like eyes. So the problem that I did, I think, is that I got excited, and I did not notice early enough that my right eye, the white space in the eye, was not equilibrated, basically, with the left side. It's slightly too big, and that is what caused my problems on that eye. Now you can probably see it on camera, but while I was painting, I was like, oh, okay, no, I can recover that. That's not an issue. But turned out I was not able to recover it. I had to retry the eye, and I screwed up maybe even more. So now I'm doing a black circle, and the point of that black circle is that inside of that black circle we're doing a blue ring after for the iris of the eye. Now you can already see that both eyes are not going to work, but whatever. So I'm going to explain right away how I did the iris. So I used dark gray blue for a first pass in the iris to do, like, obviously the darker zone of the blue eye. And at the bottom of that ring that I did, I'm trying to fix the right eye. And at the bottom of the iris, I went in with sky blue to do a highlight inside of the iris. Now the cool thing though is, oh sorry, I messed up. It's not dark gray blue I use, it's blue and then sky blue. But my blue was diluted big time, so yeah. And small brush going in for the iris there. then sky blue for the highlight. That makes for a rather interesting eye. Then I'm trying to finally fix the other eye, which I did not succeed at that. Now what I'm doing right now, if not mistaken, is the hair right above the eyelid, because there's no hair sculpted on the miniature. You're going to see these area go a lot darker there. I'm just drawing some lines. I'm doing the same thing somewhere else. I'm currently working on fine details on that thing. Those are the lines that I was talking about on the lips. The lips look a lot more interesting right now. And then I'm going to switch for the, gosh, I don't know how to say this in English, I'm sorry. But the small piece of hair that goes right above your eyelid, your upper eyelid. Trying to do the eye. I had to wait for the paint to dry first. So as you can see, the right eye look absolutely horrible, but again, live and learn. And like that, the model is slowly coming to an end. I could have made the decision to push the model further than that. I could have made the decision to work it up, smooth everything out, come back with some red tones and everything to make the model better than it is. But as a first experience, I am kind of satisfied with what I'm seeing there, and I've learned the experience that I want, and I kind of want to keep the model as is, even though it could be better than it is. So I hope you enjoyed that video, and I'm going to come up with a lot more larger scale videos like this one in the future. Alright, thank you. See you next time.